Good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us again for what is our 10th softer side session. We started these off obviously when lockdown began, and to think that this is week 10 of these is something a little bit different, but we're getting there, and things are slowly starting to open back up. But thank you, everyone, for joining us again. I know there's a lot on in the virtual whiskey world this week, with it being Facial. I think there was a Jura tasting earlier on. There's been Bunnahabhain's tasting SMWS. There's a lot going on tonight. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in for another night of whiskey with us at Tomatin. And as always, let us know what you're drinking and send in any questions that you do have, and I will do my best to ask them and answer them where necessary. As I say, things slowly seem to be opening back up, and I'm just seeing that all my emails and texts have decided to go off at the same time, which is not opportune, but things are slowly opening back up. And I think what everybody is realizing is that the whiskey industry, the whiskey landscape has changed and is in a process of change. And quite what that change looks like and how it's going to continue to develop, we don't know, but I'm confident that we will look back on 2020 and years to come as a landmark year in the history of whiskey, as we will with the world as a whole. And my guest tonight is someone who, through her profession as a whiskey writer, is experiencing the changes that we're all facing, but also as the co-founder of OurWhisky, is pushing for change in the whiskey industry and pushing for positive change. So tonight I'm going to be joined by Becky Paskin, and we're going to be talking about some of the issues that the whiskey industry is facing and going through and needs to challenge head on. So please help me welcome Becky Paskin. Hello, Becky.
Hello. How are you doing?
How are you? I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. Really well.
I just realised what an incredible time for all of my volumes to be up on phones and emails and things like that.
I had a little giggle backstage just then.
I felt like a DJ trying to sort all the levels out as this was all going on, but we're getting there. We'll ease into the night now. So how are you? How has your lockdown been? You've been very busy.
Oh, so busy. Who'd have thought? Well, it's weird. It's because lockdown happened, and my year was looking so busy with tons of tastings and talks and presenting and a lot of writing work and lots of other bits and pieces on, and then everything got cancelled. So I actually lost all my work for the foreseeable, and even now I'm not really working. So, but I've been keeping really busy, and I can see a lot of familiar names during this today as well. So I was really busy putting together a charity whiskey festival, which is not as easy as it sounds. Although I know obviously you guys have been doing your festivals as well, which have looked amazing.
Yeah, they've been quite fun as well. I mean, we had the benefit of them being one afternoon and done, and then wait a whole month before having another afternoon, and that was very, very good. I think what also the biggest challenge you maybe had that we didn't have was sending out hundreds upon hundreds of sample kits. I'm so glad that I never had to do that.
I mean, so I live in a 1-bedroom flat in Brighton, and thankfully all the bottling was done by my wonderful partners Claxton's and the Dram team up in Scotland. But then they sent all the bottles down to me, so anyone who got involved in the festival and got a whiskey pack sent out, they were all lovingly created by hand in my living room, literally on the floor right where I'm sat. So I hope everyone appreciated the time and effort that went into that. A lot of Netflix series were binged in the creation of those packs.
That's something that hasn't been talked about a lot recently. What has been your favourite lockdown Netflix binge?
Oh my God, it's got to be Money Heist, 100%. Yeah, it's insane. This it's funny because I've not really heard any of my friends talk about it. It was my 17-year-old nephew who got me onto it. He was like, "You've got to watch Money Heist." So he put it on for me one day. It's Spanish and it's caused like it blew up in Spain. Everyone's like loving it and dressing up like the protagonists in the film, who are a bunch of bank robbers, basically.
Right.
But it's incredible, so good.
Oh wow. Oh, I need to watch that. I need to watch that. I had never watched, and I'm ashamed to admit it now that I've watched all 9 seasons of it. I had never watched The American Office, um, and not Netflix. It was on Amazon, and I've managed to get through 9 seasons of 25 episodes a season, and it's gone like that. What a great show! Just on in the background all the time. Really, really good. But we're not here to talk about Netflix, of course. What is in your glass tonight?
Yeah, sorry, I had a sneaky sip then. So I wanted to, I did have a look for some tomatin, but unfortunately I don't have any in the house. Boo.
Don't worry, me neither. Me neither.
You want to send me one of those bottles from behind
Yeah.
you? Obviously it's Fèis Ill this week, so I thought in celebration of Fèis I would open a bottle. Today is Bunnahabhain's open day, so I wanted to open this, which is so see, that's a 25-year-old Bunnahabhain. The fill level for this is actually still up here, and the reason for that is I can't get the cork out without it breaking. So it's one of my favorite whiskies. I can't drink. I need to get a replacement cork. So
yeah.
Bunnahabhain, guys,
or get a couple of friends over as lockdown opens and just enjoy the bottle in an evening.
Do you know, actually none of my friends in Brighton really drink whiskey. I'm in a weird group. Yeah, it's bizarre. Like I have my whiskey friends, and then my local friends in Brighton, no one drinks it.
I'm in the exact same position. Yeah,
crazy.
Exact same position. And maybe that is a damning indictment on my abilities as a brand ambassador, that I've not managed to get any of my friends to enjoy whiskey yet. But no, like you say, the whiskey friends are almost a separate group of weirdos, I think we'll call them.
Yeah, so I couldn't get the Bunna open, unfortunately, so I've had to lump for yesterday's open day, which is a Kilchoman. So this is a 100% Islay. It's the 5th edition, so this was released 2015, I think, and it's delicious. So I think it's about 5 years old. Really malty, really fragrant, just really beautiful, really obviously really peaty.
Yeah, 100% Islay. That's the one that's made with the barley from the farm, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So you couldn't go more Islay on a whiskey than that one right there. So it is quite fitting, even though it's not Kilchoman Day.
Even though it's not Kilchoman Day, you should have done this yesterday, Scott. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I know. Rookie mistake. That's my bad. And Tomatin Thursday works as well. I don't know why we've pipped for Friday. So to be honest, most Thursday nights I'm sitting watching Roy over at Aqua Vitae anyway. So that's how I spend my Thursdays. So now, outside of this virtual world, we did the little chat with the guys over at Boutique Whiskey Podcast, or Uncorked Whiskey Podcast. But outside of that, we've only bumped into each other a couple of times, I think. So tell me a little bit about Becky Paskin. What's your background? Why do you love whiskey? How did you get into it?
Oh goodness, how long have you got? Well, I never used to be into whiskey, much like everyone, I suppose. Everyone has a moment, I guess. But for me, I mean, I always really like drinking rum, I guess, and any kind of mixed drinks. I love beer. So whiskey for me I was quite late getting into whiskey, and I suppose so. I trained to be a journalist, and the big idea was that I was going to go and be a film critic. But okay. Yeah, it's a very, very difficult industry to break into. Very male dominated, and very difficult to become a film critic. So I kind of just tried to find whatever job I could, and
I decided that whiskey would be easier.
Well, the transition into whiskey just kind of helped a little bit. But so I was a bartender, and I'd run some restaurants as well. And I found a job writing for a website called Big Hospitality, which is quite well known now. It's the sister site to Restaurant Magazine. But at the time, it launched like 2 months previously, so it was very, very new. So I worked on that, and I worked on the World's 50 Best Restaurant Awards, and yes, I've eaten in some amazing places in the world. It was a great job. But then I moved on to a global trade magazine called The Spirits Business, and I was there for about 4 years or so. I joined as deputy editor, and then moved up to become editor for the last couple of years I was there. And it was while I was at the spirits business, I fell in love with whiskey. And obviously you get the chance to try so many different spirits when you're writing about them. So I was introduced to everything from whiskey and rum and gin through to things like grappa and absinthe and baijiu and all sorts of stuff. And it's so random, all the types of spirits that you drink. But there was one spirit which kind of had this place on my heart. It had this like big hold on me, and it was whiskey. And I think if I really think about why that was, I guess it's the rich stories that come with it and the people who work in that industry. There was just so much going on in whiskey. I just completely fell for it. I left the spirits business in 2015. I actually bumped into Sukhinder Singh, who runs the Whisky Exchange. And I bumped into him at the launch of one of the Glenmorangie private editions. So if anyone remembers which one that was in 2015, let me know, because I can't remember. We had a chat, and he said, "Do you want to come and run this new whiskey website that I'm setting up?" So we went and had a chat about it, and yeah, that's how I got into ScotchWhisky.com, and just like went straight down that rabbit hole of learning way more about whiskey.
Okay, so before ScotchWhisky.com, you were at Spirits Business with more of a broad spirits remit, and then it was when you got to ScotchWhisky.com that really became what got you fully into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I did a lot of traveling around as well. So ScotchWhisky.com in the name, at first we started just focusing on Scotch, and then broadened that out to being all whiskey.
Yeah,
I suppose that was kind of like, I love that part of ScotchWhisky.com, that we covered absolutely everything. And I think, you know, what we achieved in the 5 years that ScotchWhisky.com was around for was incredible. It became the #1 whiskey editorial site in the world, and people seemed to really love it. And the day that we had to say goodbye to it was extremely difficult, not just for myself and Dave Broom and Richard Biddard, and also Sukhinder, all the rest of the team at the Whisky Exchange and Specialty who owned the site. I think it was very difficult for everybody who read it and followed it, people in the industry too. And I think even to this day, nothing has quite filled that hole. So it's it was quite sad, really.
Yeah, I think that's probably a little bit of something that we should touch on a little bit briefly, because if not, we're going to get questions all through the night about ScotchWhisky.com. I miss it. You miss it. It certainly, for me, became my daily source of information and tasting notes and everything like that. And I think the outpouring of support that I saw online from people working in the industry is testament to how successful that was and how big a thing it became. So, but mourning it is not going to bring it back. So I think we should just touch on that, just to say, just to tick off that ScotchWhisky.com question that I'm sure will be on everyone's lips.
Yeah, believe me, the amount of times I've been asked about ScotchWhisky.com, and we're maybe 10 months since it closed. It's obviously still being felt by a lot of people, but yeah.
And I think, like you say, nothing's quite filled the hole for you of ScotchWhisky.com, but I think nothing has really replaced it either, from a place to go for that one-stop shop for information. It's now back to digging around and going to Spirits Business, going to all these other websites and magazines to try and get that whiskey fix. So yeah, certainly will be missed.
Yeah, and you're right. You know, there is an opportunity, massive opportunity there for someone else to come in and to create something that is hopefully also sustainable for them and for us, because I think a lot of people would love to have that back. And I think now that it's quite serendipitous, really, that only since it's closed do we now realise what a great resource it was, and hopefully someone will come up with something even stronger and better and help us all out.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, I've just seen that Luna Aaron's come in with a question, and she has asked a personal question for Becky. Does she have an epiphany whiskey? And would you be willing to share that moment? Are you familiar with the term epiphany whiskey? Because it's something that I feel is on the whiskey YouTube quite a lot, but maybe not in the wider whiskey world.
When we say epiphany whiskey, is this the one that made us go, oh my God, I love whiskey?
Not even necessarily the one that made you love whiskey, but an aha whiskey, you know, even if it's not the one that got you into it, but a moment that is quite special with whiskey.
Okay, well, there's maybe two stories I can say here. One, there's, you must get this a lot as well, Scott, when somebody says, oh, what's the best whiskey in the world? What's the best whiskey you've ever had? What's your favorite whiskey? And you're like, oh God, I mean, I don't know. I've tried so many whiskeys and everyone has a different moment. So, you know, the answer is, well, you know, I couldn't choose my favorite child, so I can't choose my favorite whiskey. I mean, even though I've not got children, you know, it's it's the same answer that you give. But actually, for me, a whiskey which I keep coming back to, and every time I go back to it, I'm like, oh my fucking God, that is so good, is a Jameson Rarest Vintage Reserve. Which is, I don't think is being produced anymore, but it's like, it's just sublime. It's a blended Irish whiskey with a high percentage of single pot still in there, and it's unbelievable. Is anyone watching who's tasted that before? Because it is so good. It's delicious. So Scott, you writing that down?
I am writing it down right now because Alexa's switched off. I would ask her to add it to the shopping basket, but I'll have to take a note of it. So
do you know what? I think it was going for something in a region of like £200, but I don't think it's available anymore. So that would certainly be one. But then I guess a moment that sticks in my head as being a whiskey moment that is just always going to be with me is I was on a press trip to Islay for the launch of some Port Ellen whiskey. I think it was around the special releases in 2017. And we went along to Port Ellen. It's the first time I'd been to Port Ellen, where the old distillery was and where they're now building a new distillery. And at that point, all the warehouses which line the beach there, which is so quiet and so kind of somber, but just behind them you've got this huge maltings, the Port Ellen maltings, which is like driving on. It's this big industrial beast, but at the same time you're kind of reminded of this kind of poignancy of this lost distillery that was there once, was producing whiskey, which is amongst some of the most revered in the world and now doesn't exist anymore. And as we were walking around the warehouses and walked onto the beach, Dr. Nick Morgan poured us all a glass of the 2017 Port Ellen from the special releases. I forget which age that was now, maybe probably at 38, I think. So for me, having a glass of whiskey at a distillery, which is no longer operational, was just incredible. And just to stand, I didn't sit because the sand was extremely wet, but to stand there on the beach holding this like really kind of smoky, slightly goaty, salty whiskey as the waves rolled in, and just the poignancy of the moment was just incredible. So that for me was a big moment.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good answer. I don't think there's a right answer, but that's getting quite close to it.
And it's a difficult one to replicate as well, because how many lost whiskies are you going to get to taste at the site where they were made? That would be quite cool. That could be a good bucket list game to play, actually.
That would be a very, very interesting, but probably quite expensive way to tour around Scotland, right?
Yeah, I can imagine.
Just visiting closed distilleries, standing outside old buildings.
But the funny thing is, some of them would be like standing outside a Tesco or a Co-op, or whatever they've been transformed into, some restaurant or some kind, some pub.
I know it's the one that always gets me is Millburn Distillery in Inverness. I'm close to Inverness here, and Millburn is now a travel lodge. And you often think if that had been taken over by a high-end hotels company, that would be a great base for whiskey fans to stay and then travel into the rest of the Highlands. But now it's just a travel lodge with a big old chimney beside it that used to be Millburn Distillery. So, and my experience of Millburn was after a few other whiskey experiences that day, and it could have been anything in the glass. So I wasted that opportunity. So, so you touched on something there about press trips, and maybe that was the answer to my next question, which was, obviously, having worked in whiskey journalism, you get the opportunity to do a lot of really cool things with a lot of really cool companies. Other than that Port Ellen moment, do you have another couple of top moments or experiences within your career as writing?
Oh my goodness, that's a really difficult question. I wish you'd sent me these questions before so I could have prepared some answers. Oh my goodness, do you know, I do feel like I'm in a really very fortunate position that I can go and drink Port Ellen on the beach at Port Ellen and taste these amazing whiskies and do amazing things. But do you know, I think, you know, the thing that really stands out for me being a journalist who's part of the whiskey industry is really just you're kind of flung into this community of like-minded people who all just adore whiskey and have this huge passion for it. So it doesn't really matter where you are in the world, what press trip you're on, whether you've gone to some distillery in America, or you're up in Scotland or on Islay for Fèis, or you've gone to Ireland or anywhere else. There's always going to be a community of people around you who love whiskey as much as you do and who are as curious and inquisitive about it too. So, you know, every single trip is so super special because of the people that you're sharing that with. Although saying that, when I said going over to America, there is one moment which actually does stand out for me as being pretty awesome. It wasn't a press trip as such. So there's a kind of bartender conference in New Orleans that happens every July. Obviously, it's not happening this summer, but every year I go over to New Orleans and I present on whiskey there for bartenders from all around the world who fly in. And last year I decided on the way over to stop off in Kentucky and Tennessee and do a bit of a driving tour of some distilleries because I just really wanted to learn more about American whiskey and just immerse myself a bit. So I was very fortunate to get a tour of Woodford Reserve with Chris Morris, who is the master distiller at Woodford. And oh my goodness, Kentucky in July is horrific. It is so hot. So hot. Oh my goodness. And I'm actually, despite what looks like a tan, I'm really pale and I burn so quickly and I just feel the heat. And it was, oh my God, I thought I was going to melt. And we got to Woodford Reserve and he said, do you want to, we had a walk around, we saw the stills. He said, should we go and try some whiskey? I was like, yeah, great, let's do it. So he took me over to one of the warehouses and he was like, we're going to have to go upstairs. I'm like, okay. Now the warehouses in Scotland are so different to the rec houses that they've got in Kentucky. These things are like 5-6 stories tall. They're all wooden. So as you're climbing up these like ladder staircases, it just gets hotter and hotter and hotter the higher you go because obviously the heat's rising. It smells like a sauna because of all of the wood that's in there as well. And as you get higher, you can barely breathe because of the alcohol that's evaporating as well.
Right.
I was literally climbing up these stairs. Like, oh my God, I think I'm going to pass out. It is so hot. I can feel the sweat dripping down my back. I was like, as much as I love being in here, guys, I don't think I can handle it much longer. But then he goes and Chris Morris gets out a drill. I was like, cool, okay, this is different. He's like, yeah, let's just find some whiskey. And he found a cask. He's like, oh yeah, this will be quite fun. It's like, what is it? And he says, oh, well, let's get some out first and see. So he drills in the head, so that the end of the cask, he just drills straight in, holds a cup underneath to get the whiskey out. So as the whiskey's pouring out, it's all collecting in a cup. And then he gets like a little spindle, wooden spindle, taps it back into the cask to shut it off again and says, here you go. was like, oh, cool, what's this? And he's like, chocolate malted rye. Oh, nice. Cool, I've never tried that before. They don't do that as well. That was incredible. They released that as part of the Master Distillers collection. The next, I think it was in the spring or later that year, in the fall, I think it was. It's just delicious.
Taking another note.
just to have the opportunity to go in there and to look around and see all the different casks that they've got. They had they've been doing stuff with heritage corn as well, blue corn, which I think is being used by some other distilleries in the States as well. But there's just, yeah, like that warehouse was just like a treasure trove of innovation. It was incredible, just so much going on in there, and to be taken around by Chris and just to be like, what cask do you want to drill into?
Yeah. There's something that never gets old about that, no matter how many times you go into a warehouse. And we're probably in the very, very small percentage of people in the world that do actually get that opportunity once in a lifetime, but it never gets old being able to do that. Stuart Buchanan's just messaged in saying that dunking your mobile phone in the spay is probably memorable as well, right?
Yeah, that happens. Thanks for the.
I feel like he's not going to let you live that down.
Funnily enough, that's not one of the highlights of my career.
No.
Do you know, Stuart, the amount of journalists you guys have tipped over in that bloody river over the years.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. I think the sentiment that you've pointed out before, telling us that incredible story, that the people in whiskey is what really makes it. I think nothing, if anything else, the current situation's really proved that. You know, we're not able to go to Islay at the moment. We're not able to go to the Speyside Whisky Festival or to go over to Tales of the Cocktail. But when people are able to do things like this virtually, and to do our whiskey festival and things like that, and see people coming together in a way, that's the real heart of whiskey. And it's nice to see that, as much as everything's changing, that has stayed at the core.
Yeah, that's definitely something. I mean, I have to admit, I've not been part of the YouTube, Facebook Live whiskey scene prior to this. I mean, I'd done a few videos and video interviews as part of ScotchWhisky.com, and anyone who followed along with the site would have seen maybe the videos we did at Faish over the last few years as well. So, I mean, I'm comfy in front of a camera, but I've never been a part of this world as a commentator or like just to follow along or anything. And launching the OurWhisky Festival was just, I mean, that was really an epiphany, because I'm so grateful to have uncovered such an amazing community of people who just love watching along these tastings, and these, people like me just like rambling on about random stuff like tapping casks in America and falling into rivers. And I don't it really is lovely to see so many familiar names as well coming up in the comments as we're chatting along too. I keep saying it, but whiskey is just one big global family, and I love how it unites everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Now I'm going to tie in a question that's just come in with one of my own as well. Mark Thompson's in, and he's asked, as a journalist, when did you know that whiskey was what you wanted to pursue? And I'm going to follow that up by asking, how is whiskey writing changing? It feels like it's changed over the last couple of years, not just with what's going on right now, but how is what you wanted to pursue changing?
Well, Mark, I mean, to say that, the moment that I realized that I really wanted to pursue whiskey as a career was definitely when we were on that party train up to Belle Blair. bit of an in-joke, but that's kind of a big moment. In fact, another press trip back when Mark Thompson was a journalist. Let's call him a journalist. Stroke his ego a bit. It was just an infamous journey, that one. Back in the days when press trips came loaded with a few bottles of whiskey just for the journey. So when did I want to pursue whiskey as a career? Gosh, I mean, as I said, it was when I was working for the. It is not a party train. It was when I was working for the spirits business, and I just fell in love with whiskey. I can't even pinpoint the one moment. There was probably so many. I think it's I think it was the real. So I'd come from writing about foods, and I've interviewed with a ton of the top name chefs, Jamie Oliver, Marco Poi, and eaten at some of the best restaurants in the world. And it never felt like I loved what I was writing about, but it felt quite difficult to gel with other people. Journalists were very competitive against each other. If you got a scoop, then other journalists were really mad about that. And I remember the time when I very stupidly, this was probably maybe 15 years ago, mentioned to a very well-known food critic that I was a vegetarian, and he turned his back on me and refused to speak to me again. And I just didn't really fit into that world very well. And moving into spirits, and particularly whiskey, I was just overwhelmed by how warm and friendly the whiskey community was and still is. And that's, for me, it's just always just been about how lovely everybody is about whiskey. And it doesn't matter where you are on your whiskey journey, there is always someone who is willing to help you and give you advice, and in a very non-condescending way, just to hold your hand and go, let me help you out. This is what this is about. And that's what I love about whiskey. And there's always someone willing to go, oh, have you tried this whiskey yet? And just to hand it over to you. And you could be at a trade show and someone's like, oh, hey, here, have you tried this? And I love that about the whiskey industry, just this warmth and sense of community and family. Your other question was about whiskey writing and how it's changed.
How it's changed, yeah.
Okay, well, it's a difficult one, really. And it's kind of a bit of a can of worms, because if we're going to be talking about whiskey writing and how it's changed, we need to talk about how people's perception of journalists has changed. And I think, the fact that scotchwhisky.com didn't survive, we didn't get the support that we needed from the industry, just goes to show that good quality journalism isn't necessarily as revered as it probably should be. Yeah. And when I got into when I became a journalist, one of some of the things we were taught are to follow the BBC's lines of respecting impartiality, and to educate, and to always tell the truth. And to this day, that's something I completely uphold. And when I was editor of both the Spirits Business and scotchwhisky.com, that was something that was extremely important to me and to all of the journalists who I trained underneath me. And I'm so happy to see a lot of those girls who work for me now holding amazing positions in the whiskey industry. Amy Hopkins went on to edit the Spirits Business, and now Melita Kiley has gone on to edit the Spirits Business as well. And so I think it's so important that journalists continue to uphold those qualities. But I just think there are other publications, other mainstream publications, which have maybe tainted the idea of what journalism means in the wider public view. So not necessarily just related to whiskey, but to anything else. I think also, it's great that more people have come into whiskey and they love it, and that's great. And a lot of people want to write or vlog about their passions, which is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And a lot of these guys bring so much passion and a great perspective on what it is that they're tasting. It's just, a lot of these guys aren't necessarily trained journalists. And so there is room for error or too much opinion sometimes. But that's not to say that's everybody. There are a lot of guys out there and girls who are doing an amazing job at talking about whiskey and getting everybody excited about it too. People like Mark Gillespie, who's obviously a trained journalist himself, who hosts Whiskeycast. He's fantastic. There are some amazing other journalists out there, Liza Weistuck in the States as well, writing for the Washington Post. Obviously people like Dave Broom and Richard Woodard and the girls I've already mentioned as well. So yeah, there's a lot of people still upholding this idea of truth and impartiality when it comes to whiskey, and long may that continue.
Absolutely. I think something that I've seen more and more recently, and it's something that sometimes I quite like, but sometimes not so much, is how much traction writing with heavily negative opinions has become popular. It's almost like whiskey's version of clickbait, and sometimes I think that can be refreshing. But when it's always been hammered in, I think it's quite damaging to something that if you're writing about it, you clearly love the whiskey industry. So why would you be damaging that actively?
I think there are obviously some, great question, by the way, Scott. There are obviously some writers, bloggers out there who make it their mission to maybe hold the industry to account in a way which is maybe shines them in a negative light. And instead of doing it in a very selective manner, so choosing the issues that are most important and that actually need them to be held to account, it's a big slapdash approach. And I agree, I think it's actually quite damaging to the industry, but then it's damaging to those writers as well, because no one's going to bother reading them again if all they're doing is just slagging everybody off.
Yeah.
You want to talk to someone who's just miserable all the time. So and personally, I don't bother reading anything that's overly negative, especially from a publication which is just negative all the time, because it just does no one any favors. I think if you can come at it from a perspective of this is a truthful fact that I've uncovered, and I want to hold the industry to account, do it in a strategic way, in a journalistic way. So go to that brand first, speak to them about it, get their account first. Like, you're not trained, I keep coming back to it, you're not trained journalists, and there's certain things that you need to do if you're going to be writing about things like that. So if you're going to be holding the industry to account, you need to have a very balanced piece of work that you're presenting. And I don't think that a lot of whiskey blogs are balanced in their approach. It's a lot of opinion that's masked as fact. And I think that's the most damaging aspect.
That's right. And I think maybe this is something you can speak to, having come from the journalism background. I'm sure when you were at scotchwhisky.com, there would be certain topics that you would cover that would get a lot of traction, and it's probably quite attractive to follow up with a similar type of story to get more of that viewership. And I think that certainly seems to be something that I see quite a lot of, is if someone holds the industry to account and it does very well, writing negative becomes part of how they get an audience in.
Yeah, but it's lazy. It's just lazy. Yeah. I mean, there are so many, I mean, with scotchwhisky.com, there were brands that we would write about. We call them the cult brands, because it doesn't matter what they've done. We just mention their name in a headline and it's like, boom, traffic. And people would just come flooding to the site. But, you know, like we would never run a story about a particular cult brand that was just wishy-washy, that was just a bit meh. Because if it's not a decent story, then what's the point in covering it? So there has to be something behind it. There has to be some kind of solid reason why you're telling people about this particular story. Just because you know it's going to get loads of clicks, yeah, it might do, but I'm not willing to write about it. I had a publisher once who was like, who told me that celebrities always get traffic. So mention celebrities in your stories and you'll get traffic. And I was a bit, well, I don't just want to write about celebrities when there's no real story there. And it was something they would push on us to do, was just write about celebrities, where are those celebrity stories? And I just, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm just not going to do it, because it's too thin. There's no story there. Why am I writing about the fact that, I don't know, top of my head, someone like Jennifer Aniston ordered a whiskey in a bar? So what?
Yeah,
who cares?
So did Dave at the pub last week.
No, and it just dilutes your publication. It dilutes your brand. So I don't see the point in just covering something for the sake of it, just because, or even writing clickbait headlines where people click in and say, "Oh, well, that's not actually what I thought it would be." So okay, but then again, you know, that word clickbait used to annoy me so much, because people thought that what we were writing was clickbait, because I don't even know why they thought it was clickbait, but you know, clickbait, guys, if you're not sure, is when a headline is like, "Oh my God, you'll never guess what happened next."
Yeah.
And then you get the story and it's really dull. But we would never do anything like that. It was just the headline and the story. We'd be like, "Oh, I don't believe that. I don't think that's true." Clickbait. Not, I mean, regardless of whether you think it's true or not, it's definitely not. It's not clickbait.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a funny world. Being a journalist in any industry is very, very different. I've got to say, I very rarely tell people that I'm a journalist. Even when I was doing more journalism than I am now, because right now I'm not writing at all. Mostly because they immediately say, "Oh, are you recording our conversation?" Like, what they have to say is like some massive story. It's like, you're really not there.
Yeah.
I write about whiskey, so I think you're all right.
Yeah,
Right.
unless you know something that I don't know about a new release. Oh, who is that? Who do we have with us now?
Yeah. Oh, she keeps tapping me to say hi. This is Isla. Hello.
Hi, Isla. Very,
Hi.
very good name at this moment in time.
Yeah, great name. She actually loves Isla whiskey as well. She's a big fan of smoky whiskey.
I don't know if the RSPCA are tuning in, but here's hoping not.
She doesn't drink it. Here, I'll show you. Okay. She licks her lips. It means she likes it, and she just licked her lips. So there you go.
There you go.
I can't
Fantastic.
believe I'm showing you all this live on air. I'm some crazy cat woman.
Yeah, to answer your question, we're not recording this. It's just going out live. So now we have spoken for 40 minutes without addressing something that I know you speak about a lot, but I was really keen to get your opinion of whiskey writing, because it's something that I've never really been able to my communications with whiskey writers have been them asking me questions. So it's been nice to throw that back at you tonight. And I think a lot of people are getting insight that they wouldn't otherwise have. But the big thing that we wanted to talk about, and Tabitha brought it up earlier on, is OurWhisky. Where did that come from? What is OurWhisky about for those that are watching that have maybe not heard of it? I'm sure everyone has, but maybe don't know what OurWhisky is all about.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just want to say hi, Nicola. Thanks, crazy cat woman over here. Yeah, so OurWhisky was something that came into life about 2 years ago. So it was launched around International Women's Day in March 2018. And it was something which I put together along with Georgie Bell, who is the Global Malts Ambassador for Bacardi. So she looks after like Aberfeldine, Royal Brackler, Craig Ellachey, Altmore as well. So she and I decided to put together something which started out as being a social media movement to start with, just to raise awareness around the fact that there's still too much marketing in whiskey, or positioning in whiskey, of it being a drink that is only really for men. And not just for men, but for white bearded men. So in all whiskey marketing that you see, particularly at that point 2 years ago, it was just so white and so male and tons of beards. And we did a lot of research into the different marketing campaigns from brands, so not just Scotch but American whiskey, Canadian, Irish as well. We did an analysis of all of their Instagram accounts, so all of the images that were going out on their Instagram accounts, and found that just 20% of those images included an image of a woman, when the rest were men. Now, when you look at the other industries which are maybe thought to be male dominated or even female dominated, they are doing such amazing work to try and turn things on their head. So you look at Pampers campaigns, which is trying to encourage more men to change nappies, for instance. And these guys
I really wish they wouldn't.
And these guys are like light years ahead of what whiskey's doing. So I mean, personally, I was just sick of going out and buying a whiskey in a bar or in a supermarket and being told, really, that's a man's drink. Are you sure you want to drink that neat? Do you not want some water in that? Are you sure? Is that okay? Is that for you? Is that for him? But it's ridiculous when you think about it, because anyone can drink whiskey and anyone can enjoy whiskey. It's just this perception that's in people's heads that it is a drink for men and that it's a hard spirit, and you certainly, no woman would in her right mind want to drink it, because we are very gentle. And it bothered us. So we created this social media campaign to raise awareness, and we didn't realize how popular or needed it actually was, and it took off immediately and has been gaining traction ever since. But it wasn't until ScotchWhisky.com died that sorry, the cat's playing about. It wasn't until ScotchWhisky.com died that I then had the time to take it on and turn it into a more commercial proposition. So that's currently what we're doing at the moment with the OurWhisky festival. So we're in the middle of like creating a new phase for OurWhisky, and we're turning it into a educational platform. And the educational platform is essentially a place where anybody of any background feels welcome and comfortable to learn more about whiskey, and they're guided in a non-condescending and very impartial way to just discover whiskey for themselves. So the festival really came about because, as I say, the coronavirus kind of started to hit, and I'd lost all my work. Was doing nothing and facing no government support at all because I hadn't been freelance for long enough. Apparently, I was sponging off of the government. I had absolutely nothing going for me, but I just knew that there are other people out there who have it like a far worse time. All the people in the hospitality industry, the bar industry, who are finding it difficult at the moment. A lot of hospitality workers being made homeless, for instance, just because they can't pay their rent and then being kicked out because they've got no jobs. So I wanted to do something that gave back, and I was having a conversation randomly with Mark Jennings, who contributes to Whisky Magazine, on Instagram at 6 o'clock in the morning, and we were saying how, it's so lovely that when the whiskey industry were getting together over, whiskey shows and whiskey festivals, and why don't we create like an atmosphere like that online? I thought, yeah, okay. So decided to put this festival together with all the proceeds going to the Drinks Trust charity, and it wasn't easy, but we put it together, and we announced just earlier this week that we raised £12,000 for the charity, which was great.
Incredible. That's an incredible amount of money from a great festival. I mentioned to you off air that I had been able to tune into a couple of them. And actually on the final one, the Game of Thrones series, even had a sample kit in front of me as well. And what was really nice about that, and it's probably something that I don't know if you realise how nice it was the little touch of the little note that you had put into each box. I mean, that's a huge amount of, your arm must have been dead by the end of that, but it was a nice little touch, and it just brought that human touch back into whiskey that is being lost a little bit at the moment.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's I just wanted, look, these packs were put together. It was a massive DIY project, and I wanted people to feel like, yeah, it's £30 for a pack. You get 5 whiskies, and you get to listen to the whiskey makers talk about the whiskies that they've made, which is great. But I didn't feel like I could put together a quality product that reflected value for money. I wanted people to feel like they'd really gotten something out of it, rather than just giving money to charity and they'd just got some like 5 whiskies in an envelope. So part of it was, well, what can I do to make people really love this concept and to bring them in a little bit? Because part of OurWhisky's ethos is creating this community of like-minded people who, at whatever stage in their whiskey journey they're at, they're really curious about whiskey and they want to learn more. So by creating this community, and I just wanted to write a little note to everyone. And yes, there were over 200 handwritten notes that I had to put together. But just, I think, sometimes it's the little touches that really mean something. So I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because it was, I actually got, I had, this was really lovely. I had a message from a girl on Instagram today. She just sent me a private message and said, I've just got to say thank you so much for putting together the festival. She said she bought a pack for her and her dad for week 4, so the Game of Thrones whiskies, and she said she's new to whiskey but he loves it, and they've had a very distant relationship over the last 20 years and have never really had anything in common, but now they've got something in common that they really loved and they did it together, and now they're going to continue and do some more. And she even bought a bottle of the Talisker for him as well for Father's Day, which is really nice. Yeah, so just to hear a story like that just putting this tiny festival together has just brought people together as well. It's just, it's incredible.
That'll bring a tear to a glass eye, that one.
I know, I nearly welled up at that point.
So on our whiskey as a whole, there is a lot to unpack, and the first thing to point out is that the comments coming in are overwhelmingly positive about our whiskey, its goal, its message. Something that I wanted to ask you about was our whiskey lives very much on social media, and perhaps this is not the case that you found, but I've always thought that social media has a tendency to be a little bit of an echo chamber in that you reach out to the converted. You know, I don't think there's going to be many people clicking follow on our whiskey that are asking you, do you really like whiskey? Is that how you drink whiskey? So my question from that is, how do you take that base and that following that you do have on social media and then take that the step further that's actually going to develop into real change?
Mhm. So it's a twofold approach, really. So our whiskey, in terms of a consumer-facing community, I suppose, is to educate people about whiskey. So let's get liquid to them. Let's conduct tastings. Let's teach them about whiskey in a really simple, easy to follow way, where they're not feeling intimidated or feeling like it's something that's in a man's world. It's something they can get involved in, because once they get, and I'm sure everybody watching feels the same, once you get your foot over the threshold, you're sucked in, and it's impossible not to get sucked in. So for us, it's about recruiting new consumers in a way which is really exciting and just a bit different. So there is stuff to come on that. I don't want to give away too much right now. But the other part of it is a job that we have to do in collaboration with brands. For the most part, the brands are the ones who are responsible for getting the message out to consumers on a wider level that whiskey can be drunk by so many people. So there have been numerous studies that consumers are influenced, they make their purchasing decisions based on whether they see themselves reflected in that product's marketing, placement, branding, whatever you want to call it. So if you think about the fact that the majority of the people who do the household shopping are most likely to be women. I think it's something like 80% of people who do the household shopping are women. But you think that only 35% of whiskey drinkers are female. That's a huge discrepancy. And you have to think about why. And when you dig deeper into it and you see, oh, well, like historically, the whiskey has always been marketed at men. You look at marketing campaigns, it's just men in them. So why should we expect consumers to change their perception of who can drink whiskey if brands are still consistently marketing to men? If it doesn't change, there's going to be no change amongst consumer perception. So that's where it all starts. And it starts with, yes, the branding and marketing, but then that filters through to the writers, the journalists, not just in whiskey, but in lifestyle consumer publications, the amount of articles that you read, which are top 10 reasons why you should date a woman who drinks whiskey. Like, but they see what the brands are doing and they just copy it because that's all they know. They don't know any different. Why should we expect them to know any different? And then you get people who, you know, the writers for TV shows and films, again, they're just going to copy what they see. If the whiskey industry is portraying itself as being a product for men, they've always done that. Yes, that's their target audience, and don't dismiss them. Continue marketing to them for sure, but include women in the conversation too. And you'll find all of a sudden your whole market opens up, and that's how perception changes. And it's not a very easy process. It will take a long time. But there are still, I would say, the majority of brands still don't feature women in their marketing. Even the ones who, around International Women's Day, will say, "Oh, yeah, you know, we've got loads of women working for us. Our whole team is women. We love women. We have loads of women in the industry, loads of women in our company. Here are the women who work for us. This is brilliant." And then go straight back to just marketing to men. That's something has to change. So from our whiskey's perspective, we have a two-pronged approach. One is speaking directly to consumers to encourage them into the industry, and the other is speaking to the brands to try to encourage them to maybe take a different approach. And it has worked. It has worked. We have had a few brands who have completely changed their marketing strategy, and it's really working for them. But the thing, like, for anyone who doubts what I'm saying, there's a really great case study for this. Glenlivet, right? in the US, which is normally the whiskey consumers are 35% women, the Glenlivet has a consumer base of 50% women, 50% men.
Wow.
And the reason for that is that they position their whiskey as gender neutral. So you look at all of their marketing, it's men and women, and not women in sexual positions or dressed scantily clad or serving men, which is often women's role in marketing. So the fact that they've managed to achieve that is just testament to the fact that it works. And then when you look at the success of something like Glenlivet Founders Reserve, and I know a lot of people here will disagree with me about the quality of the liquid, but if that one expression was a single malt brand in its own right, it would be the 5th biggest selling single malt brand in the world.
Wow.
Full stop. Just that one expression.
This is one expression.
Yeah. And when you look at what they've done in the US with recruiting women into the industry, like it's a no-brainer.
You said exactly what was on the tip of my tongue there. You know, we as an industry are always asking, how do we get new drinkers into the category? How do we get new drinkers into the category? And it seems that we're ignoring 50% of the potential consumers there by just sticking to the way whiskey was always sold. And I think you can we definitely have to look at whiskey marketeers of the past for bringing it to the elevated position that it has now. But that doesn't mean that we can't challenge the way that marketing was done for a very long time. And so before this, before I brought you on, I was looking at the top brands in the world and looking at their Instagram channels and things like that, because I think that is now, you know, there are still television commercials, but Instagram seems to be a good sense check as to what the industry is doing. And in terms of global whiskies, and what I mean by that are brands that are distributed globally, because there are certain brands that are massive, but maybe only in one country, and that's maybe got more cultural background to it than the actual wider market. It seems that there is a change, and it seems that there are more of the big brands really featuring women in their marketing, not in a sexualized way like you referenced. And that's only a positive thing, but I think it's important to realize, as you said there about International Women's Day, that one campaign is not going to change 100 years of marketing.
No. It's honestly, I think it comes from what I think is going to happen going forwards is, we're going to have some brands that are leading from the front. We already are seeing that with the likes of, well, the Glenlivet, Hay Club is doing a great job, and Johnny Walker as well is doing a great job of defining these conventions. The more the big brands step in, it'll influence the smaller brands, and also vice versa. So the smaller brands have fewer shareholders to please and fewer directors to please. So they also, especially craft producers, guys, you're in like a brilliant position. You've got no existing consumer base already. If you already go in marketing to a 50-50 split, especially also, let's not forget that whiskey is whitewashed in the UK. Let's include people of different ethnicities in your marketing too, and highlight, you know, the LGBT community. Everybody is just, it's so whitewashed and so westernized. Let's include everybody. But these craft brands that are new, you've got a great opportunity. Lead from the front. You've got no existing consumer base to please. You're not going to be alienating anybody. So crack on, get on with it, and, you know, good luck to you. And also, don't forget about the amazing press you're going to get. People like Nick Nean, for instance. I know they're not quite ready with their first whiskey yet. I know it's coming soon, but the fact they've got a female founder doesn't really matter, because there are so many women working in whiskey. But what Annabelle Thomas is doing with Nick Nean is incredible, and just highlighting women in all of her marketing, and putting people, women and men as well, putting people together on the same level is brilliant. And why shouldn't she? Why couldn't she? Like, great, good for her. The same with some other brands as well. I know the Lakes and doing it. Georgie and I did a presentation at the World Whisky Forum a couple of years ago at the Cotswolds, and straight after that presentation, which is basically everything that I've said now, but with a few extra pictures and graphs and things. But we straight afterwards, we had so many of the distillers in the room walk up to us and say, "Never thought of it that way. Thank you. We are about to do a photo shoot for our next marketing campaign, and I just realized we don't have any women in it. So brilliant. Thank you so much for highlighting it now." And they went off and included women in the marketing campaign. because
Yeah,
they
well,
believe.
that's actually somewhere that I have to hold my hands up as well. I'm very fortunate to be in the position working with a brand that does in the limited marketing that we do feature women in it, and it's great to be able to say that. But this is the 10th one of these softer side sessions that we've done, and it was only when I was planning this month's activity that I realised we've done 9, and it's been me speaking to white blokes about whiskey, and that wasn't by design or anything like that. And it was I wouldn't even say it was oversight because there wasn't that level of thought into it. But I think the point you've made there is that it is oversight, even if it's not active or recognized. And it was only after we had had the conversation on Boutique's podcast that I realized what was going on, and that actually, no, I've got 9 of these lined up and not one woman involved. And that's not because, I mean, all the conversations that I have at shows and the whiskey group chats, there's loads of different people from different backgrounds in there. So it was really strange that when we were doing this that had happened. So I was really keen to get you on to rectify that as well.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for having us on. It's it's great to be on here, and but I completely understand it's a subconscious. I want to say subconscious bias, but people don't realize that when they talk about whiskey, they think about whiskey, it's not just you guys. There are so many other whiskey YouTube, Facebook Live things going on with very, very few women in them. And I don't know if anybody else has noticed this over the last few weeks of lockdown. The more of these that there are so many of them, there are very few women in anything. And it's quite, it's a bit not alarming, but it's just like, well, here we go. The industry, like, guys tend to stick together. And quite honestly, the reaction I've had for OurWhisky from some big name guys in the whiskey industry is, oh God, who wants to hear about women in whiskey again? Let's not give her a platform to talk about it. Shut her up now. And that is sadly quite, it's an attitude that we've had to put up with. But I don't think it's something that people can't have that attitude anymore. It's just unacceptable. And I think the more that people like yourself, thank you so much for having me on, allows women to be on the screen is going to help so much more. Because I don't know about any of the women watching here, but I know Tabitha, who I can see coming up, and I've name checked you so many times over the last few weeks because you've been like a big follower of OurWhisky. Thank you so much. But she was saying in one of the OurWhisky tastings, it's so nice to see a woman doing one of these, because where are they? Mm-hmm. And I think that's a big thing, that, you know, if anybody who's out there who's conducting a whiskey tasting online, whether it's a Facebook Live or a YouTube, it's part of your vlog or whatever it is, just think about your balance, your gender balance, because there may be more women out there who are keen to get into whiskey, but don't feel like they're represented. And the same for people of different ethnicities as well. So let's include everybody in the whiskey conversation, because let's tie it back in quite nicely. We're one big whiskey family in the world, aren't we?
And actually, Luna, who's on as well, she raised the point. You're not a unicorn. You're not the only woman working in the whiskey industry. I mean, I remember last year, I think it was the first time it happened, but we had our Christmas party at Tomatin. And it was the first time that the number of women in the office heavily outweighed the number of guys there. It was quite an interesting thing. So it's not like it's hard to find women in whiskey. And there is almost a level of guilt on my end that the first time that I've had a woman in on these conversations has been to talk about women in whiskey, rather than just being a woman in whiskey talking about whiskey. But I think that this is an important topic and something to talk about. So
well, I'll tell you what, next time I come on your wonderful show, Scott, we'll talk about whiskey. the actual liquid.
Hopefully by that point you'll have got into your Bunnahabhain.
Oh my God, yes. I'll find a cork and draw that sucker out.
Yeah. So you've talked a little bit that OurWhisky is going on to its next phase of its life now, into this more educational platform. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing how that unfolds. I think if the festival is anything to go by, then it's going to be a lot of fun to be taking part and watching and things like that. So one thing I wanted to touch on, though, is from your perspective as a writer and everything you've done in whiskey, what are the other issues that you think that the industry is coming across? Obviously, the big one for our whiskey is inclusivity in whiskey, but do you see any other issues at the moment? Is there any other things that you see happening that just get you a little bit annoyed? I certainly have many, but I'm asking you the questions tonight.
Oh, way to skirt issues, Scott. Ah, me and the firing line.
Yeah.
Look, I think for the most part, whiskey is doing a brilliant job of including everybody we're talking about. So I'm going to put her away because she's I'm making me a bit hot. There's a lot that the whiskey is doing that to include more people, which is great, and it's everything from releasing expressions that are slightly more affordable through to the high end, so you're trying to encourage more people in. I think from my perspective, I'd like to see more attention to creating complex flavors at the lower end of the price spectrum. I think it's unfair to just assume that everybody who kind of only afford a £40 whiskey or even £30 to £50 whiskey should only be drinking soft floral blends or really light style single malts. I think, let's give people who don't have a huge budget a spectrum of flavors to taste. And there are some amazing whiskies out there at that lower end, which are doing a great job. But I think for the most part, it's quite difficult for people to explore around. I'd like to see even more focus on flavor rather than like obeying the whiskey enthusiasts and talking about chill filtration and yeast types and fermentation times too much. It's quite honestly, I find it boring. Like, I love understanding how flavor is made, and we were talking about education before this, and Scott's just about to take his exam for the IBD diploma, and I've done a GCD a couple of years ago. So I know all about all of this stuff, and so it's fine. But I think for the regular whiskey consumer, they don't understand this stuff, and it's not necessarily interesting for them when they're just getting into whiskey. So I would like to see brands maybe thinking a little bit more about, at least talking about the whiskey more in terms of flavour and using language that people actually understand. Cask finishes. Can we just bored? Let's talk about flavour creation in other areas. There's loads and loads of stuff going on, and to say that you've matured a whiskey in a cask that's some kind of wine is innovation. It's not. God, let's call it what it is. I mean, it might be delicious, but it's not innovation anymore. Let's move on from that.
You've said the word that annoys me a lot, which is innovation, because I think maybe the last time that any real innovation happened in whiskey was maybe the mash filter. Really, the whiskey is designed to be traditional to an extent, so innovation is difficult. I definitely love what you're saying there about creating complex whiskies at affordable price points. I think obviously one of the difficulties is that some of the way that complexity is created is more expensive to create, but even today, and of course this is a Tomatin channel, and there's that element to it, but we're whiskey geeks. Even today I saw that Cairn have launched their 16-year-old at £69, and it's got chocolate malt in it. That is interesting to me, and not unaffordable, so it's good to see more of that. As ourselves at Tomatin Distillery have developed the Kuboken range now, and playing about again, like you say, maturation in different casks is not innovation, but you can create complexity within that. So we've got combinations of Muscatel and ale casks, and I'm seeing Markson and what the guys over at Glenfiddich are doing with the experimental series lend itself to that. So it's great to see more of that, but I think there's still so much more that can be done.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think cask finishes are they're probably the quickest way to innovate in whiskey, to create flavour, because everything else takes between 5 to 10 years to come to fruition. So whether you're using a different grain type, a different yeast type, maybe you're playing around with fermentation times, maybe you're, I don't know, roasting your malts, like whatever it is that you're doing, that's going to take so long to mature. But a cask finish could take between like 6 to 12 months and done. Okay, there's your new expression, your innovative new expression. So it's easy for brands to just roll that out, but the rest of it, we're going to have to wait for it. But I think it's great that, you know, Fettercan have rolled out a chocolate malt whiskey. Brilliant, love it. Signet, which Glenmorangie Signet, which includes chocolate malt, one of the best whiskeys around. Yeah, it's expensive, but it's, you know, it's delicious. I would love to see more chocolate malt. Now, Eden Mill have been doing a lot of roasted malts. Obviously, they're a brewery distillery, so there's loads going on there. The whiskey is still relatively young, so it'd be interesting to see how that sort of comes through as well.
Yeah. Now, alongside these Friday night sessions, I've been doing a quick takeover every Tuesday. We're calling it Tomatin Tuesday on Tomatin's Instagram channel, where I very much focus more on the Tomatin products and dive into the background of them. And we've started to get into some of our limited editions and things. And one thing that keeps coming up, and I'm going to pose the question to you, is when does a finish become a double maturation? And do we need to have some form of I like when the SWA pull back on regulations, but I think sometimes, you know, calling something a double maturation after a year is probably a bit deceiving, you know. So the reason this came up was we were talking about our 15-year-old Muscatel, which has got a 5-year Muscatel finish, which is quite a long finish, and, you know, you could probably create a totally different whiskey in that time. So that's something that you're saying, finishes are irksome, but at what point do they become, actually, this is something really interesting?
I think there's two questions in there. One is, what's the difference between double maturation and a finish? I guess my answer would be, who cares?
Yep.
It's whiskey's been in at least 2 casks. Cool. Like, what flavors do you get from it? That's all. That's it. Like, I don't care. Like, what's it taste like? Will I enjoy it? That's the ultimate kind of answer. Like, I don't really care. I mean, as like somebody who understands whiskey in the sense of like, how long will you how long has it been in that cask for, therefore how much flavor am I going to get from that? But I also would want to know things like, well, what's the history of that cask? Has it been used before? Is it an STR? Is it a rejuvenation? How many life cycles has that gone through? Like, these are the questions that everyday whiskey consumers aren't going to ask, and they're not going to get the answer for. So it's kind of a bit redundant, really, to say these are the 2 casks we've used. And then I just seen Mark Thompson say something about she does re-racking become aftersun, which doesn't make any sense, but I kind of get what you mean. Re-racking, when, you know, if you're having to put a whiskey in a different cask because either that cask is broken, so you have to re-rack it, or the whiskey is not quite tasting right, so you have to do something about it. And so by recasking, you're then rejuvenating that whiskey, bringing it back to life. Does that then mean it's double matured, and do you then have to put that on your label, or is it classed as finished? I don't think it really doesn't matter. I don't think it's a I don't think it's a thing. Your other question, what was that?
I don't remember myself. I think your point is great there.
Cask finishes, though, they're interesting.
When do they excite you? Is it all about when they actually do create flavor and you can talk discernibly about the flavor of what you're going to have in your glass?
Yeah, and obviously, like, some casks will impart really, really noticeable flavors. If you're an unpeated whiskey and you're using a peated cask, then you're going to get some of that smoke through. Again, it depends on the cask's history and how long you then leave it into the cask. The interaction between it completely depends on so many factors. Even things like red wine, port. If you have a really heavy style of spirit or wine or whatever it is, or a beer or whatever, then of course that's going to impart a lot of flavour. The Jameson Stout cask, for instance, is really, really stouty, kind of really great in an espresso martini. That kind of whiskey would be brilliant. But then again, if you have a whiskey which has been finished in a white wine cask, or a very, very soft, easygoing kind of sherry, maybe like Muscatel, half the time I can't really even tell. Like there's like a tiny hint of maybe some stone fruit, maybe like apricot or slight peachiness, but half the time it's really difficult to discern. Maybe there's some grapes if it's a Sauvignon Blanc cask or something, but yeah. But do you know what? It's still a riff on that distillery's character, and if you have diehard whiskey fans of that particular distillery, then they are going to notice a difference. So obviously, it's an extension for them, and it's interesting for them. But I think it depends on the cask. It depends on what you're trying to get out of it, and obviously the golden rule, which all blenders will tell you, is not to necessarily put your whiskey into absolutely anything, and it's not always going to turn out great. You've got to work with the inherent flavors that your distillery is creating in the first place, and then any finish that you use, any type of cask you use to then mature your whiskey, needs to complement the spirit that you have in the first place. So it's not a case of just like, oh, we'll just chuck it in a red wine cask and it'll be fine.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everything that you're going back to there is that there needs to be more clarity about flavor, and that is really what's going to translate to people. My biggest gripe, and I'm not going to go into too much detail because I could be here all night, is regions. I just don't think there's any place for whiskey regions anymore, other than how do I find this distillery? Beyond that, they don't make much sense anymore. But I'm going to leave that there because this could be a much longer conversation if I don't.
Well, yeah, I kind of agree with you to an extent. I did actually write an article for scotchwhisky.com years ago agreeing with that regions have become just nonsensical. But I do believe that they have a place in helping beginners navigate, because if you think about Scotch and the perception that Scotch is this really kind of refined, revered drink, and there are hundreds of distilleries, and you're like, where do I even start with this? I feel like regions do help kind of segment some of the classic distilleries, especially the really affordable ones, the ones with affordable whiskies. It helps them navigate the different flavor styles with those, and then you can go forward from there. But I kind of agree. I kind of think Scotch needs to have a different approach. Maybe distilleries should be kind of fitting into flavor camps a little bit more, but even then, like one distillery can sit into 3 or 4 different flavor camps depending on the whiskeys. So it's it's subjective.
I mean, I like the way that SMWS have gone about it, but then there is the problem that if you're trying to simplify things, having 12 different flavor categories doesn't necessarily do that. I think the point I would make, almost playing devil's advocate to what you said there, is that if I'm new to whiskey, I'm probably not looking to spend a huge amount of money on it. And if someone says to me, oh, you like smoky whiskey, you should try Islay, and I buy a bottle of Bruichladdich, I'd be pretty annoyed that I spent £40 on a bottle of Bruichladdich and it's got no smoke in it. But that's as far as I'll go, because it's a great conversation point, and maybe one that we'll have on one of these sessions at one point. But
I think but like the remedy for that, I guess, is that people tend to buy whiskies based on recommendations from friends and family. And I don't know about you, but the amount of texts I get saying, oh, I want to buy a bottle of whiskey for my dad, my mum, whoever, what whiskey should I get? They normally like X whiskey, and from that you can base a recommendation. So I suppose for whiskey consumers, it's all about finding someone who can recommend a specific whiskey that caters to their palate. But not everybody likes whiskey, or not everybody has access to that person who can recommend something who is knowledgeable, as people like yourself or people who are watching this, for instance.
I must admit, most of the messages I get along those lines are, what staff prices can you get at the moment? But I think that says more about my friends than it does about yours.
Well, I don't. To be honest, I don't get staff prizes. I just get sent bottles.
Yeah, there you go. Not a bad situation to be in.
It's not a bad situation. As I say, like my Bunnahabhain is pretty full. I need some help getting through that at some point.
Absolutely. Well, Becky, we've gone over an hour and 15 minutes now, and I could happily keep talking, but it's 10:15 on a Friday night. I'm going to let you go. I'm going to let you enjoy your weekend. I know you've been very, very busy with the Whisky Festival. So I just wanted to say thank you very much for coming on. I know you get numerous opportunities to do things like this, but I think the message that you're spreading is incredibly, incredibly important. And I'm glad that you've been able to talk to the people that have been tuning out into our channel about this over the last couple of hours. So thank you very much for everything you do, and I'm looking forward to seeing what is next for our whiskey.
Thanks so much, Scott. Thanks for having us on, and congratulations on putting all of this together, because I think it's just been wonderful. Like, I've caught up with a few of the softer sessions that you've done, and they're great. You've had some brilliant guests on, and obviously have some wonderful viewers as well who keep coming back week after week to watch. So you're obviously doing a great job with it. But thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much. Have a good evening. Slàinte mhath.
Bye, guys.